Have you heard that quote? It's the quote often misattributed to Aristotle is, it's a mark of an educated mind to consider a thought without accepting it.
I remember when you said that.
Welcome to Let's Pick This Up Next Week. I'm Dee.
And I'm DJ. We're two therapists who like to dive deep into everything from mental health to politics, voting, and whatever else is going on in the world.
We're here to have real conversations about life, the issues that matter, and how it all affects us. Because let's face it, there's always something more to talk about.
Exactly. So grab your coffee, settle in, and join us as we break it all down.
We'll catch you up on the big stuff, the personal stuff, and the things you didn't even know that you needed to think about.
And when we run out of time,
we'll pick this up next week. So in 7th grade, every time I'd ask a question or I'd get a question asked and I would say, depends, my 7th grade English teacher would go, is a brand of adult diaper. And so I was terrified of the word depends up until grad school, where that became the answer for everything, which was it depends, because everything is a shade of gray.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I do like shades of gray, Dee, but I also hated that answer in grad school because I felt like...
Wait, the book or like in life, the shades of gray? There are 50 shades of gray. Less than 50 is...
I haven't. That's good. I read that book. But also, I felt like in our ethics class, that was the answer. And I was like, oh my God, everything doesn't depend. When it comes to ethics, sometimes there is a right and a wrong.
You're not wrong, but I think sometimes we're so used to, as a society, as people, having a right and a wrong. And I think now more than ever, and it's not just politics, I think, and almost everything, people are so strong in their beliefs that like their hackles go up anytime something threatens that belief or has a perception of threatening that belief. And I think ultimately that's what's dividing and creating division.
It is. And, you know, we've mentioned in recent podcasts about DEI and how, you know, the ideas and that have been so divisive. And we did our podcast episode on genders and that there's actually not only two of them. And so like kind of thinking about that black or white idea and learning that like not everything, some things, but not everything is black or white.
I think most things live in the gray, and that sucks because I am a black and white. I want to know what's right, what's wrong. Heck, I just probably annoyed the crap out of my boss earlier this week because I got an answer to something that like it was in the gray, and the way that was answered, I was like, that's not the same gray that we always operate in. So I need you to define the gray for me. But we operate in this world, and it's partially because like, and I know we talked a bit about obviously cognitive overload and things like that. When we find something that feels genuine and feels true, it's easy just to sink into it and then forget about cognitive dissonance.
Right. What do you think? Like when I think about cognitive dissonance, it takes me into like DBT mind frame because, right, we know about in dialectical behavioral therapy that the dialect, yes, is not the dialectical, right? The dialect is that two opposing things can exist at the same time. But I think that like a lot of times because we do have that belief that sometimes people don't recognize when something is actually cognitive dissonance where it doesn't really exist together.
Yeah. And cognitive dissonance can take a lot of forms too. So like cognitive dissonance, I always think about the easiest way is like when I explain it in therapy, especially in cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, we talk about you hold a value, but your actions don't align with that value. So it creates this dissonance between what my ideal self and then my actual self don't align. We as people don't like to feel that dissonance. We don't like to feel misaligned. And so we find ways to like make it make sense. How this relates to when people have differing opinions and things like that is, you know, if I hold this belief to be true, and then I learn this piece of evidence that is counter from my belief, I'm going to feel a little uncomfortable because it's not aligning. So one way or another, I'll make myself believe it.
Right.
I actually looked up because I mentioned it in a previous podcast and I had to look it up. There was a study done on college-age kids that were hazed into sororities or fraternities. And what they found is that people who went through the hazing process did feel more aligned with the group. And so a lot of people saw that as like, oh, that must be the benefit of hazing, is that it creates a shared experience. But actually what it was is the amount of cognitive dissonance, the mental gymnastics someone have to do to say, I went through basically torture to be here. Then it's hard to say, well, I don't even like this anyway. So like if someone went through the hazing process and realized actually fraternity life isn't for me or sorority life isn't for me, but they already did all these things, it's like convincing yourself, well, I must actually like being here. Why would I have tortured myself to be here if I don't want to be here? And the same thing happens in all of the ways around us. It happens in abusive relationships. It happens when we believe someone threatens our sovereignty or our personal identity. Happens all the time.
Right. And also like the kind of like I flashed over to like Stockholm syndrome for a minute too, when you talk about like abusive relationships and that kind of stuff.
That's what Stockholm syndrome
like,
is. It's cognitive dissonance. Yes.
Exactly. Right. When you feel aligned with like your captor, the person who might be abusing you, because you have to think that because you're there and you're trying to make the best of the experience, right? You must want to be, but also like there has to be a decent side to this, because like you can't just suffer in misery the entire time.
True. Yeah. Well, and it can be hard whenever we're taught for so long, like our whole life, we're taught this is the way to do things, or there's only one way of thinking. We're not often told to reconsider or rethink things. We're kind of told like, if you change your mind, you're a flip-flopper, or you're not strong in your belief system, or you're weak-minded, when truly rethinking and relearning and reconsidering things is a sign of strength. Thanks, misquoted Aristotle.
Apostle.
Nope. Not the same thing. This is not shirtless young teenage boys. It's reeking of cologne.
I like to shop at Aeropostale, by the way, because they have the right length of pants. Like they're not too long for me. They're 28 length, and you can't get them hardly anywhere else.
But like I digress. Child length. No, I get it.
So, what was the last thing that you just said? Because it reminded.
Aeropostale.
But that's the thing too, Dee, with the age of like social media and everything being available to everybody, and anything that you ever wrote on the internet at any time ever being available. And so like a lot of times, right, so people will be like, how can you be saying this thing now? And if we think about like Biden, right, because didn't he vote against something that was LGBT related, like back in the 1990s or whatnot? And I think there was something, and then everyone's like, oh, how can he be so queer friendly? Like back in 1991, he made this comment or he made this vote. And it's so hard for a lot of people to make that jump to say that like, oh, he got more information, educated himself, and was able to change his worldview.
And that's what it comes down to, is like more information. But sometimes we're not open to more information.
Right.
If you tell me something, again, that goes against what I know to be true, I'm probably going to reject it as false. Right. And I don't mean this to like pick on any certain group, but I'm thinking of like how people consider like vaccines now. Is it's so you start to get into like this group think, and anybody who has any evidence that runs contrary is immediately disregarded, despite that like sometimes both sides, and not, in that argument, but in a lot of arguments, right, both sides often have good points. Like, I was just talking to someone today about abortion rights and access to healthcare. And like, on the face, we seem like we're on different ends of it. But when it got down to like, let's just talk about the specifics. Let's talk about, is this right for a person? Is this right for a person? Is this right for a person? We realized that we actually thought of it all exactly the same. But we both were like, you're wrong because you describe yourself as this, and you're wrong because you describe yourself as this.
You're right. And that's the thing. Like a lot of times if people actually sat down and had conversations about their beliefs, they might find that they're more aligned on certain things. But the thing is that, again, like a lot of times people will see the belief about the black or white, like a belief that is different than theirs somehow threatens them. And also we get to, a lot of people have the core belief of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not, this enough. And so if someone challenges something that they're seeing, then they're like, oh, you're saying that because you think that I'm stupid. And so if someone is going to get defensive right away, then they're not going to be open to hearing different points of view.
For sure. I mean, I think of even when we tell people, what's the science say? We're basically, for people who like that threatens their sense of intelligence, are like,
right.
Well, I'm not stupid. And like, no one said you're stupid, but perhaps you don't know how to find a peer-reviewed article,
well, and that's
and not
the
a WordPress.com.
Right. And that's the thing, like, you start talking maybe to some people about like peer-reviewed articles, and even just saying that, someone might, you lose people, and they might be like, well, I'm not, you're not so smart just because you went to college, because those types of articles aren't as easily accessible as far as like if you're watching the news or something, the news, they're not like giving you their sources, or like where did they look up the information, or what studies did they look at. Once in a great while, they'll like mention a study somewhere, but like generally, you're just receiving a bunch of biased information that probably did come from a lot of research, but nobody's talking about it. So, if your access is just like the local news or Fox News or CNN or whatnot, you don't care too much about like peer-reviewed articles.
Sure. And if I like get on my soapbox for just 1 second, as a slight aside to this, the media is primarily responsible for this because of exactly that. Like, you can take the same thing, the same study, and because most studies end with complex discussion and results, like you can interpret it many different ways, or take, the snippets that you want. Like, if you're only reading the abstract, babe, you're missing the whole, you know what I mean? So the news, unfortunately, plays a huge role in this, because if I can blame this on 9/11 for a minute, way back train, that's when 24/7 news really started, and it needed to be. We were a country at crisis. You needed information all of the time. It was unsafe to feel like you didn't know what was happening. And then when we were no longer in crisis, we became reliant upon news as this constant source of information. And there's not that much stuff to talk about. So eventually, what bleeds leads, Have you ever spent so much time with someone that you like love, but then by the end of it, you're like annoyed? It's like the same idea of like, if we just continue talking for so long, it's going to create this type of like resentment, and like that becomes the thing that news has to talk about because it gets you interested.
Right.
So anyway, news has partially been responsible for dividing us.
For sure. And when you think about like, right. And when you think about like binary thinking, much of like what's happening in the news and this political climate is, you have the right side of the news, right? Like, not right as in correct, but like the right side of the news and the left side of the news. And, and both have their own biases. And knowing that like the truth and the more factual story is probably somewhere in between both of those things. And like, again, being able to find like, where's the gray, and trying to research like more than one news source. I often like to read both sides, the right and the left, so that I can see like what each side is being told, be able to recognize the bias, and like try to like do some research and like find out what's more likely going on, somewhere in between that.
I think too, and I love that. I love that you're like doing research on both sides. I find I limit my access to a lot of that stuff. Like, I listen to a 15-minute podcast in the morning that covers the top headlines, and that's it. If there's something I need to look into more, or there's something more pertinent like that, like, I should know, I look into it. But otherwise, I really try to limit. And then I have learned the most important thing I can say when someone's, has a very impassioned perspective on something that I know nil about. One is realizing the Dunning-Kruger effect, that person might not know as much as they think they do, because Dunning-Kruger effect.
What's that?
Isn't that when you think you know more than you're making me question myself?
No, I don't know.
Isn't it?
That's not a Dunning-Kruger. Is it two people's
cognitive bias in which incompetent people tend to assess themselves as skilled?
Kruger.
Dunning-Kruger. So
I haven't heard of it. Okay.
Yeah. So people assume themselves to be experts when they really don't know that much. But one of the most important
Mm,
things I've learned is saying, I don't know enough to have an established perspective on
right,
this.
right,
And I
right,
think I think people are afraid to say that because it feeds into what you said about like, I'm not enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not
right,
whatever enough.
right,
You got to be comfortable saying, yeah, I'm not knowledgeable on everything on the planet.
right, right.
So it's okay to not have a perspective.
Right. And that kind of like, when I was doing the research for this episode of the podcast, like, that kind of ties into the idea that why people go on black or white, or why black or white thinking is so common, because uncertainty doesn't feel good. So trying to find a place that you can land at and stick there feels more safer than uncertainty. And so like the same thing, people are also very uncomfortable, but as society pressures that too, saying that they're wrong. Like I always talk about the difference between psychiatry and therapists,
Mm-hmm.
because like I work at a practice who has a huge number of psychiatrists, a small number of therapists. And one of the psychiatrists said to me that, like, man, when I talk to the therapist, they're always talking about boundaries, about like work-life balance and having boundaries and that kind of stuff. And I said, I mean, we talk about that in school. Like our program is so much about like self-care, making sure that we have boundaries, making sure that we protect ourselves, but also like being able to know that like we don't have all the answers, and we don't need to have all the answers. And I remember one of our professors saying like, it's okay, you don't have to memorize everything. Like you only have to be able to know where to find the answer, right?
Exactly.
But psychiatrists are doctors, medical doctors, who go to med school with a completely different environment, which is very competitive, which is very like, don't you sleep when you're dead, which is you never admit that you're wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
you can see the difference in a lot of those practitioners, because, again, like they're not going to be like, I don't know,
Yeah.
I'm not certain. They're going to be like, that's not a thing. And you must be making it up. They're going to feel more comfortable. Not every psychiatrist, not every doctor, but a
Sure.
lot of times, because they're not where we come into a field, where we're coming from a field that like really focuses on vulnerability. They're coming from a field that does not
Yeah.
focus on vulnerability at all. So that's going to
Yeah.
be another difference between people admitting that they're wrong or not, because that takes some vulnerability.
Absolutely. It takes courage to say you don't know something and to
Hmm.
sit with it. I mean, I can think of so many times where I just decided to talk out of my ass, and as a
Hmm.
person of decent intelligence, I can say something
Hmm.
that at least to lay people
Right.
sounds convincing, right?
Yeah.
Because that to me was safer
Hmm.
than, or I felt more comfortable than just saying, actually, I don't know the answer to that, but let me get back with you.
I've always been a terrible liar. And so like I
That's not
don't
a
think that
bad
I
thing.
I I don't think that I've ever been like super comfortable doing that, which I think is like why people say to me like, it's so brave because you're so vulnerable. And I'm like, geez, like I've just been so bad at lying. Like I can't keep it up. I can't do it. Like everyone would, they would find out 2 seconds later that I was telling a lie, because I would say something that would show that I was telling a lie. And I would be like, oh, I just said that. Like I don't know what I was talking about.
That is amazing. I love it. Anytime someone says you're so brave, what they mean is like, wow, that was embarrassing for you.
Right. And like, I don't, yeah. And the same, like I remember a long time ago, several years ago, when we were presenting at a conference in person together. And like, I would introduce myself by saying that, I'm autistic, I'm transgender, I'm, all this stuff. And people would say to me, like, that's so brave. And I'm like, it's not brave. It's just vulnerability. And
Just
it's
the
sad
thing.
that
Yeah.
that vulnerability
Mm,
is seen as bravery, because like, because in society, really, like a lot of times, I mean, the word vulnerable means weak, right? Like that's one of the
anonymous.
definitions,
Yeah.
right? Right. So, but really, being able to just be like transparent is what like everyone should be able to be comfortable to be. And then, we'd probably be able to be in the gray a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm still reflecting on the fact that you almost gaslit me into thinking I didn't know what the Dunning-Kruger effect was.
And I
But
wasn't even trying. It's only because I don't remember ever hearing that term. Is it hyphenated? Because I'm going to look it up.
I think so. I
Okay.
think so. Yeah.
Is it two
Dunning-Kruger. It'll be
names?
there.
Like
I think,
Ehlers-Danlos?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I might have
but
heard
you're,
of it. Yeah. A lot of times I know like the definition of stuff, but like have no idea like
but
what
the
the word
term.
is or the term.
Well, and I'm fascinated by the idea because, like, taking a little trip over to doing a little bit of knowledge sharing about when you supervise a new counselor, there's developmental levels to counselors, the same way there's developmental levels to clinical supervisors. And one theory says there's three different levels of a counselor. And level one, these are like they're new, they're excited, they're confident, they're doing all of the
Mm,
things. I don't like working with level one counselors. It's fine, but
yeah.
like that's not my
Mm,
sweet spot.
mm.
Level two is when they realize, holy crap, I actually don't know anything.
Right.
And they start to have that
Right.
self-reflection. It's like the exact definition of Dunning-Kruger. I love working with level twos. And then level threes, they're more confident in knowing what they know and what they don't know. They're not facing this
Hmm.
existential crisis. But I like
Hmm.
those in the sweet spot right in the middle that are just cantankerous enough about the profession, but want to learn more. That's my favorite.
Right. Right. Yeah, I am. I just got done teaching a theories class. It's my first master's level class that I taught
Yay!
since I thanks that I taught since I graduated. And that is one of those things when you a lot of students feel like they have to like I have a great handle on this. I know like everything about this. Like really, you just now are learning, and you don't have to know everything about it, and that's okay.
I tell literally when I promote people, I say, don't feel like you know what you're doing for the first year.
Right.
Don't rush to do everything, but to get to like society values
Mhm.
competence more than learning. They value intelligence over
Right.
growth. Like
Right.
it's, I understand why people do that, and self included. I'm very type A. I want to seem knowledgeable and competent. And, I don't like
Yeah.
when people question my intelligence, but then I have to realize, like, no, it's good. I should be open to this.
It is, and that's one of the things. Like when I'm doing therapy with someone who's a college student, and and they're like, oh my god, like I can't like ask too many questions, or I can't like this, or I can't like that,
Mm,
and I'm like, do you know what your job is as a college
in
student?
college.
Yeah, like your job is literally to learn, not to
Hmm.
know. Like if you already know, then you wouldn't have to be there to learn. So like it is the perfect place to be able to, but it is again like you have to people feel like they pressure themselves to like I have to know all the stuff.
Mm.
That's literally not your job there.
Do you know I recently felt the exact opposite of this? I don't
Um,
know if we talked about it on air or not, but recently, so like I have a tendency, a lot of people think highly of like, I mostly know what I'm talking about. And I was in a
mm-hmm.
training with all the leaders in my entire department. And so we had this training, and the person leading the training, who's actually a dear friend of mine, asked a question to the room, and I knew the answer. But I'm like, I also kind of worked with her on this presentation just like a little bit, but I didn't know this
Right.
question was coming. So I didn't want to participate because it wasn't about, ooh, pick me, I know all the answers. But I knew the answer. And then
Mm-hmm.
someone, like, after the whole room couldn't answer, someone's like, well, I think Deanna is going to be the only one who knows the answer to that. And I literally just smiled and laughed. And in my head, I'm like, why didn't I just say I did know the answer to that? Like, to me, that's
Mm-hmm.
like, that has to do more with ingrained that I am not allowed to be smart because I'm, whatever. Like,
Right.
but I knew the freaking answer. And it's still, this was in November.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Mm-hmm.
recording
You're
this
still
in
thinking of
March.
it.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
still thinking about the word proselytizing and how I do know what it means. And I could have just defined it for everybody in the room, but I chose not
Right.
to.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And especially if you're in a
yeah.
room where like you know the stuff and other people aren't answering, you don't want to be like it's hard. It can be hard.
Yeah, because some of the stuff I'm just like, no, I want other people to speak up. I don't want to
Right.
be the smartest in the room. But
Right.
then,
The
like,
only
when I was
one. The one
literally
who.
called upon, I was like,
Hmm.
I could have just answered then. But
Right. Yeah.
now
Yeah.
everyone thinks I don't know the word proselytizing. How embarrassing.
Hmm. You should spell it and give the definition right now.
I can't spell for crap. But it's like when you're on your soapbox, it's like trying to get people to
Hmm.
believe what you
Right.
believe. Yeah. To
Hmm.
be like a prophet.
Right.
Proselytizing. Yeah.
Right.
Not
Hmm.
prostituting. Similar idea.
It
To
does
get people
sound
to
like
buy what you're selling
sound
is
the word.
prostituting
Hmm.
and proselytizing. Same thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, DJ, how do we stay open? Prostituting aside, I guess. How do we stay
Well,
open when we're stuck in black and white?
I think, and one of my favorite Where did you go, Dee?
I don't know where I've even
There
been.
you are. There you are. I was
Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye
consulting
Joe?
my notes. I know. Um, what was your question?
I don't know where I'm coming or where I'm going.
Because you were Cotton Eye Joe
I
for a
was just
second.
thinking Cotton Eye Joe over here. I don't know. For the record, we record these at the end of the day on Wednesday,
I
and like
know.
my brain's already fried and loopy.
I scheduled a session for 6 o'clock tonight, so I still have to do that after.
Yeah, because it's 6 o'clock your time.
Yeah. Right
Yeah,
now it's
not
only
my
5
time.
o'clock. Yeah.
And it's
It's
8 o'clock
you're
for
at
me.
8. You're at 8 o'clock. Yeah, it's really
I
late.
got like the loopy, I need to eat dinner. But anywho,
And
so
I think,
DJ, how do we
yes.
stay out of the black and white?
So, right. So, what I use a lot, and like I said, I mean, dialectical behavior therapy, and like it is definitely a foundation for what I do and my work and how I live my life. And it's so interesting, Dee, because I asked my buddy Chad, Chat GPT,
That's what you've named your chat
if
GPT
if
Chad, yes.
they, what they thought the difference between radical acceptance and acceptance is. And I have adapted the idea so much of radical acceptance that, like, because when I looked at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's how I would just describe it. But like when I think of acceptance, I only think of it in terms of radical acceptance. And I think that DBT is,
Interesting.
and radical acceptance, right, is like when you accept a thing. So the example that Chad gave was if you lost your job, say that's the scenario. So acceptance is I lost my job. Radical acceptance is I lost my job. I don't have to like it, but it is a thing that's
It
a
is.
real thing that
Yeah.
is. And I do need to move forward in some way. So how am I going to do that? And that's how I practice like acceptance so much in my life that like I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I use it so much talking to people. But again, like that's how we can get out of like that black and white because like, it really is again, like let me choose like this one side or let me choose the other side when like both of them can exist at the same time or something can exist and it doesn't mean you have to like it. And how can you adapt that in a way that doesn't look like all or not? It's the other term for black and white thinking, all or nothing
All or
thinking.
nothing.
So because like there's hardly anything that is all or nothing. There's hardly anything that is black or white. There are things, but being able to like know that two opposing things can exist at the same time and you can hold both of those truths and you can find something somewhere in the middle. Or like I had talked about it 2 weeks ago, a few weeks ago, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, about wise mind, which is another like
Yes. Yeah.
DBT concept. And really, those are ways that we can move out from like being so solid in the way that something has to be and move into like what it is, not what it has to be or what it's supposed to be or what it should be. And I think a lot, like tying that into a lot of times people will say, and we said in the beginning that, sometimes people are like, this is the way it's always been. And my answer to that is often that just because it's always been that way doesn't make it right.
And chances are it's not how it's always been. It's
Right.
just recent memory.
Right. And always, never, all of those words are the things that we have to look out
Yes.
for.
Yeah. When we talk about a lot of therapy concepts, we talk about exactly that. Like when you hear yourself saying absolutes, like always, never, or you're using the shoulds, I shouldn't do that, I should be doing this. You're just setting yourself up to like not sit with your own emotions and like give them the space they need. Like I loved the example you gave about acceptance versus radical acceptance, because in that example, radical acceptance, you weren't saying, I'm sure I'm going to find something so much better and I'm going to love it. And this is going to be everything for a reason. And that absolutely is a valid mindset, but it's okay to say too, this sucks. I'm not happy. That is also acceptance when you can look at it through that lens.
Exactly. And it is. And that's why sometimes I find it problematic when somebody's going through something tough and then they'll be to somebody like, just tell me everything's going to be okay. And the other person would be like, everything's going to be okay. But sometimes like, it might not be okay to the way that like you're thinking it's going to be okay. And knowing that like, it might not be what you thought it was going to look like. You'll be able to move forward and you can like learn how to do that. But like, it might be okay in the way that you're thinking.
Yeah. If we're flexible about what okay means, the same way that we should be flexible about, the ways in which our values play out in the world. because chances are we have a lot more in common with the people around us than we think, but we're so
Mm-hmm.
into
Right.
categorizing things and naming things. And I can't remember if we talked about it ever on the podcast or if it's just something you and I have talked about, because we present quite a bit on best practices and working with queer clients, and we're actually presenting again at Addiction Studies Institute
It's
this
the third
coming
time.
June. It's our
It's our
third
third
time.
time.
Yeah. New name, revamped a little bit. So excited. Please join us. Addiction Studies Institute. We're the virtual day, so you can join from anywhere. Little shameless plug there.
Mm-hmm.
But I have said things like, because we talk about, the alphabet mafia name, LGBTQIA+. I
Mm-hmm.
saw today, God, LGBTQVEQIPA, something ridiculous that I'm like, I know what all of these letters stand for. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was like gender expansive was in the middle. But
It's
I'm
a
like,
G.
yeah. And I'm like, how many more, guys? How many more?
That's
We're
why
so
you say
set on
queer.
naming things. So we just say queer. I'm like, which everything, it's valid to want to name things and hold things.
Yeah.
But when we categorize to that level of specificity
Mm-hmm.
and other things too, I'm just not calling out just like the giant rainbow flag that keeps adding
Right.
colors, which
Right.
is, but everything else that we tend to categorize like that too.
Right. Right. And I think like we've talked before, like inclusivity is important, but like if you get too specific, then you might be leaving out groups that you don't intend to leave out anyway.
We're way too specific now. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, back to your original question, I want to add to like how do we move out from the absolute, or how do we move away from black or white thinking? And one of my favorite things I like to say, but it depends. Sometimes I like to say it a little bit
It
different because
depends. Haha.
someone pointed out to me, because I'll say, you have to give yourself some grace. Someone told me they thought that was too religious and they like compassion better. But grace or compassion, however you
Sure.
call it, like knowing that like when you're trying to do something, whether you're trying to learn something new, whether you're trying to debate something, or if you're like, maybe my point of view needs to change. If you're compassionate to yourself and knowing that like it's okay to change, it's okay not to know everything, it's okay to like want to be open to learn, then that can help you move out of it. It's like really being able to like be compassionate with yourself and knowing that like you're not supposed to know everything in any single moment.
I want to consider the times that I'm thinking in the extremes and thinking in the black and white and not
Mm-hmm.
allowing patience in the gray.
Right.
So
Yeah. And trying to apply your DBT and not sit in cognitive dissonance.
exactly. You can hold multiple thoughts and it's okay and, accept things. So,
That's right.
well, listeners and or watchers, I hope you do the same. I hope you take time in this next whatever, we're kind of on a bi-weekly schedule right now,
Mhm.
to think about ways that you can address this, because ultimately that's how we start to break down the division that we have, is to
Right.
be more understanding and recognize there's a lot more shades of gray between us and the people next to us.
Very
So,
true. Thanks.
so thanks for listening, watching. Please drop a comment, a review, thumbs up, 5-star, whatever the platform you're watching on. Giving us some feedback greatly helps new followers find us. And we greatly appreciate it if you share us on social media and let people know that you're watching. So keep on keeping up, and we will catch up with you next time on Let's Pick This Up Next Week.